And thanks to all of you for watching FBN AM this morning. It's been great to have you here. We now send it over to somebody who's always great to see in person every day, Dagen McDowell. Good morning.
I don't Cheryl Casone giving me running advice every morning as I hobble in like a broken down old lady. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. We'll see Cheryl and Tracy later this morning. Good morning. I'm Dagen McDowell in for Maria Bartiromo. It's Monday, June 4th. Your top stories at 6 a.m. Eastern. Markets extending gains. We have a triple-digit gain on the Dow futures this morning, so we're looking at a rally to start this week. This after stocks did just that on Friday following the better-than-expected jobs report, 219-point gain on the blue chips on Friday. And global markets following those gains this Monday. In Europe, we have green across the board, the biggest winner being the FTSE 100 in England, up 0.7%. And in Asia overnight, take a look at the picture across the four major markets there. It was buying galore. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong gaining 1.6%. Facebook under fire. A new report from the New York Times says that the social media giant gave users data to device makers, including Apple and Samsung. This raising new privacy concerns surrounding the company. And it comes as the tech industry faces scrutiny over censorship. House Intelligence Committee Chairman had a big warning for big tech on Sunday Morning Futures with Maria yesterday.
I would hope that they just don't get involved in politics and don't censor conservatives and Republicans. But if they continue to do it, then we have to move, obviously, to hearings on these issues.
We take a closer look straight ahead. Trade turmoil. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross returning from China with no deal. It comes as our allies ramp up their threats and criticism, threats of retaliation over steel and aluminum tariffs. The rising cost of oil set to hit flyers. American Airlines warning that it's going to raise airfares. We take a look at whether this is the beginning of a broader trend. Former President Bill Clinton offering his take on the impeachment debate. He says proceedings would be in full swing if a Democrat was in the White House. A surprise celebrity appearance at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School's graduation. Jimmy Fallon giving a heartfelt, emotional commencement speech honoring the victims of that shooting in Parkland, Florida. Plus, SpaceX launching a satellite overnight, but it's not all success as the company announces a delay to its space tourism plans. All of that and so much more coming up this morning. Fox News contributor Katherine Timpf is here. I thanked her first thing for getting up so early for us. Benchmark managing partner Kevin Kelly and Maslansky and Partners president Lee Carter. Welcome one and all. I can't wait to hear what you two have to say about this Facebook story.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So that's our first topic this morning, but I want to tease a little bit of what's coming up. Also joining us this morning on Mornings with Maria, the Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, Tennessee Congresswoman, Senate candidate Marsha Blackburn, and Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Don't miss any of those fine folks. But first, our top story. Facebook on the defensive once again this morning, this time after an investigation by the New York Times reveals the scope of data sharing deals that the social media giant struck with at least 60 device makers, including Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, over the last decade. According to the Times, the partnerships allowed the companies to access users' personal data, as well as information of their friends, even if they specifically blocked Facebook from sharing that information with third parties. For its part, Facebook is defending the data sharing as consistent with its privacy policies. Officials say they're not aware of any abuse by these companies. Kevin Kelly, your take on this report. So to be clear, with the Cambridge Analytica scandal and what Facebook was doing from 2007 past 2014, they were letting app developers access the data of friends of friends.
Right.
This is different. This is device makers, and we did, until this report by the New York Times, we had no idea that they were up to this in such a broad scale.
Yeah, and one of the concerning issues is that this actually goes against a 2011 decree they had with the FTC. And part of the problem we're having here is that this went against what people opted into, saying, hey, you cannot share my information with third parties. So is Facebook, in a sense, trying to say, listen, we are a phone? Is that what they're trying to say here? If they're saying we're not going against the decrees, we're not going against people's privacy. I think the big issue, too, is also security, right? Anytime that Facebook allows your data information, friends of friends, any way it can be pulled out through a third party that you haven't given access to, there's security at risk and implications. And so I think this is a par for the course for Facebook. Their motto has always been move fast, break things. They haven't cared about laws. That's been consistent with their modus operandi year over year, especially when it's come to affiliate marketing, to taking in payments in rubles. I mean, across the board, they don't want to be held accountable.
So, Kat, with the app developers, Facebook ended that policy in 2014 and started winding it down. But with these device makers, like phone makers, Amazon, Apple, BlackBerry, Microsoft, and Samsung, most of the partnerships remain in effect, though Facebook started winding them down in April.
I just don't know when there's going to be some good news coming out about Facebook. It's a bad story, then there's another bad story. Who else are they sharing our information with? A lot of times you get on Facebook, you set your privacy settings a certain way, and if you block that, you assume that it's not going to be shared. Now, my phone company knows more about me than I thought, and I just don't even see myself even continuing to use Facebook much anymore. I barely use it as it is.
It does raise a lot of privacy concerns because so much information is actually stored, very private personal information is stored on the actual phone.
Yes.
And it raises issues about how much of that information was circulating between Facebook and all of these device makers. Some device makers could retrieve personal information even from users' friends who believe they had borrowed any sharing. It's really astonishing.
I don't even use Facebook Messenger anymore because now I'm suspicious that maybe they're reading my messages and sharing my messages. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous.
No, I don't use it at all either.
But
I have it installed just in case
someone messages you that you need, right?
Well, I think the overarching thing that we're kind of tiptoeing around is that this is going to lead to regulation. We've given them enough leash to regulate themselves, which they said, we need to do that. You're going to hamper us. You're going to restrict us. But they are stamping on and trampeding over our rights and our privacy. And that's a big thing. So this is going to lead to regulation. And if it's not here, we've seen it come out of Europe. So the regulators really need to come around and figure out what they're going to do about it. Otherwise, Europe is going to actually do worse regulations that could actually impede it.
Well, Kat, it raises the issue of basically losing market share for Facebook. As for you, which of these social media platforms do you use the most? Because I've almost stopped using Facebook.
Same. I pretty much entirely use Twitter and Instagram. I basically only use Facebook. There's some family members that I keep in touch with on Facebook, so some of them are on there. But yeah, back to the regulation thing, one that concerns me about that is that it might make it harder for competitors to try to start their own app. I would love to see an alternative to Facebook at this point because so many bad things have come out about it. I don't even really want much to do with it anymore.
Well, speaking of regulation, I just want to move on to the warning for Silicon Valley, again from Capitol Hill. This is in the wake of Google listing Nazism as an ideology of the California Republican Party, just days ahead of that state's primary elections. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes says that the search giant and other big technology companies could face hearings from lawmakers.
The best thing would be is for there to be a new search engine that actually doesn't censor conservatives. I think there's a free market solution here if somebody can compete with Google. If they can't, then ultimately we're looking at monopolies, and then that brings in a whole other set of circumstances. Are these companies, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Apple, etc., are they monopolies? And should they be reined in? I would hope we don't have to go there. I would hope that they just don't get involved in politics and don't censor conservatives and Republicans. But if they continue to do it, then we have to move, obviously, to hearings on these issues.
Kat, the threat, there's then again the threat of regulation, but these tech companies can't get out of their own way. The fact that Google would think that that was okay, whether it was an algorithm or not, it doesn't matter because again, it raises political bias.
Right, absolutely. They would never see anything like that on a liberal or the Democrat Party. There clearly is some sort of bias towards liberals and Democrats on some of these search engines. And the fact that Nazism is the very first thing listed, that just makes me roll my eyes so hard that they're just going to get lost in the back of my head. I'm so sick of seeing things like that.
We need new emojis just for the disgust.
Yes,
the
totally.
disgust that we feel at the bias.
I think it's really important that we talk about this, because we go to Google, we go to these places because you think that it's going to be fair. You think that it's just going to be, I'm going to put up a search and things are going to come up. And what we don't realize is that within Google, within the algorithms that are there, that there's already bias. And we also have to learn, and people don't realize, how much people pay to get to the top of the fold and how much information is being manipulated.
Do you remember the elections where they actually were swaying auto-population of search queries for Hillary Clinton? I mean, this was completely uncovered and talked about, right? And even on Twitter, though, there were certain things that were trending, you know, for Hillary Clinton and not for Donald Trump. So you saw this bias play out, and this goes back to, you know, the federal election committees. It goes back to the FTC. I mean, this is a complex, convoluted thing, and now we're talking about breaking up some of these companies, separating YouTube from Google, Instagram from Facebook. There's chatter's happening around that.
Kevin, real quick, do you think that this concern is factored into Facebook stock here?
Yeah, it is, and that's why you've seen the stock actually run up, because the advertising is still going that way, and digital advertising, and it's growing 30% year over year. It's hard to get out of the way where advertisers are going to spend their money elsewhere.
I'll raise it this way. This Cambridge Analytica app developer story, they could say, it ended in 2014, this is old. But you know what? This story that's in the New York Times, they only started rolling it back in April, so it didn't just end. This was going on, and again, the users did not know about it, so it'll be interesting to watch that stock today. And we want to move to trade really quickly. The Trump administration showing no signs of backing down for imposing tariffs, despite pushback from our allies, U.S. allies in China.
The idea that we are somehow a national security threat to the United States is quite frankly insulting and unacceptable.
I regard this as more of a family quarrel. This is a trade dispute, if you will. It can be solved. And Mr. Trudeau, I think he's overreacting, but the point is we have to protect ourselves.
All we're doing here, all the president is doing, is defending this country's national security, sovereignty, and economic security from the flood of imports.
I'm going to go to Lee on this first because this is interesting language. It's just a family quarrel. Poo-poo. And also, this is a national security issue, so basically you just called Canada and our European allies national security threats because of steel, which, by the way, I've got a lot to say about this. Go ahead.
I have a lot to say about this because this comes down to messaging and being consistent to the American people. And one of the things that I've been watching lately is how independents are reacting, especially this is really important going into the midterm elections because it's not necessarily accounted for in all of the primaries. Independents right now are really vocalizing that they are nervous and that they are scared about what's happening with trade. There is a huge fear of pulling out of NAFTA, which they talked about yesterday on Maria's show. There's a huge fear of getting into a trade war, and this could really have an impact on the economy. So going right into the midterms right now, making these risks, making these kinds of tariffs where people are going to feel it in their pocketbook, I think it's a very, very risky endeavor on the part of the administration.
Because people vote with their pocketbook, essentially. There's a lot of other things that matter, but if this ends up affecting the economy negatively and ends up making people have less money or have to pay what is essentially a tax on many goods, they're not going to be a big fan of that. I'm not a fan of it. I know that much.
What I was going to say is steel prices are already up 40% this year already, about 50% in the last year. So steel prices have been climbing. Higher prices, it puts pressure on businesses in this country that use steel. Again, where do you source that? How are you going to pass along those costs to your customers? Are you going to cut jobs? Are you going to cut wages? How are these businesses going to cope with this? Because this is a huge looming issue that was just dumped on top of the American people and businesses.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue we're having. But at the same time, we've seen Canada has enacted protectionist policies, especially when it's come to dairy, poultry, especially with timber. So I think when they're talking about a family quarrel, they're trying to address all these issues and modernize NAFTA. They've talked about that. And the negotiations haven't really gone anywhere, and we've passed all deadlines.
We shall see. That was a very nice way of putting that. Yeah. But again, it's not just steel and aluminum tariffs, it's the retaliation that we're hearing about from Canada and Mexico and our American allies targeting those very red states. Coming up, paying at the pump and in the skies, why American Airlines is warning about price hikes if oil prices remain high, and how other airlines are reacting. And President Bill Clinton says the only reason that President Trump is not facing impeachment hearings right now is because he's not a Democrat. More on the former president's take. That's ahead. Breaking news right now, Russian President Vladimir Putin inviting Kim Jong-un to his country. Cheryl Casone has the details. Good morning, Cheryl.
Yeah, Dagen. Russian media is reporting that Vladimir Putin has invited the North Korean leader to travel to Russia this fall. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reportedly passed Putin's invitation to Kim Jong-un while he was visiting Pyongyang just last week. Now, Putin wants Kim to attend the Eastern Economic Forum, which is held in Vladivostok every year. Of course, well, we shall see what happens there. Let's ball another headline for you, international anyway. At least 25 people are dead, 20 were wounded following a volcanic eruption that happened in Guatemala yesterday. This is the Fuego volcano. It erupted for the second time this year, spewed a lot of thick smoke nearly 6 miles into the air. Reports say that more than 3,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. Meanwhile, the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii continues to rage on, leaving some residents now stranded. The area's escape route has been cut off by lava and now has left them with no power, no cell reception, landlines, or even water. Authorities are planning to airlift people out if the lava continues to spread. And actually, over the weekend, 3 people were airlifted out of a remote area near that volcano. Well, Microsoft reportedly agreeing to buy coding site GitHub. Some analysts say that Microsoft might pay up to $5 billion for GitHub. This, of course, would bolster Microsoft's programming tools as it's trying to move toward building more open source software. GitHub said last year that it was booking about $200 million in annual subscription revenue. This deal could be announced as early as today. Taking a look at shares of Microsoft, higher in the pre-market, up almost 1%. Dagen, and those are some of your headlines we're following. Putin and Kim Jong-un. I'm not even sure what to say about that, but back to you.
Interference by Putin and attempted manipulation of the United States once again. Kevin, this Microsoft GitHub story, good for Microsoft?
Yeah, I think it's great for Microsoft. You started to see actually the transition from Steve Ballmer to Satya Nadella. He's really opened up. I mean, they've got partnerships, including with other apps to have open source, and it's brought on users into their hybrid cloud, which is growing 90% quarter over quarter. So I mean, they've really transitioned and opened up the company. They had to get away from the hardware business, and they're now going into a software as a service company.
And really giving Amazon a run for its money in terms of the cloud computing business, because that's a big grower for Amazon as well. Yeah,
and they've gone into the subscription model for their own software. If you think about Microsoft Word, all the processing, it's been unbelievable what they've been able. The transition has been phenomenal, especially if you think about kind of the boondoggles they had with trying to do their own cell phones, the Zune, and hardware. They didn't really have any direction. They have direction now.
It is fascinating to watch the turnaround of a company that, could have been irrelevant if they weren't careful. So.
But again, that's what Apple's trying to do with recurring revenue streams.
Yeah, and it's Apple Worldwide Developer Conference starting today, so that all these things are going to be talked about.
I love that you're up on the news, Kevin.
Yeah. Try to be.
You were out of breath when you came in here earlier this morning.
I know, because I was reading.
Yeah, okay. And by the way, if you're from where I came from, it's not GitHub, it's GitHub. Coming up, a graduation surprise from Jimmy Fallon for Stoneman Douglas High School's class of 2018, as the Florida school also celebrates the memory of those lost in that school shooting earlier this year. And Biden, 2020, why former Vice President Joe Biden says he's willing to put his hat in the ring and when he'll make up his mind. Rising oil prices not only hitting consumers at the gas pump. Now the CEO of one airline says ticket prices are set to go up due to higher fuel costs. The price of crude oil is nearly 40% higher than it was 1 year ago. Off its recent highs, however. Joining me now, Price Futures Group analyst, Fox Business contributor Phil Flynn, always fired up bright and early. Phil, the warning comes from American Airlines' Doug Parker. What do you think of this, and will it be the first of many?
I think it may be. You know, a lot of these airlines were spoiled last year. They were making record profits, $38 billion in profits, and they didn't think that oil prices might ever go up. But all of a sudden, oil prices have gone up. A lot of them were not prepared for this because they believed in this lower for longer mantra, and they weren't hedged correctly. Now, I don't think that prices are going to go up right away, but this is a strong signal that if these oil prices stay where they are, and they probably will, then more than likely we're going to see those prices for tickets go up.
Hey, Phil, it's Kevin Kelly here. You know, what's pretty interesting is that OPEC is actually trying to figure out the whole production conundrum. Do you think they're going to open up their spigots and actually bring more output onto the market and actually help stabilize oil prices and really put a cap on the run-up we've seen recently?
Kevin, great question. Last week, we heard from Saudi Arabia and Russia, and they were basically signaling to the market that they were ready to raise production, maybe by 1 million barrels of oil a day. But as soon as they said that, the price of oil dropped like, 8% in a couple of days. I think it scared the cartel out of them, to be honest with you. So I think they may have second thoughts because today, on the weekend, they basically said that they might raise production, but they weren't very solid about that. They're going to be very price sensitive before they make that final decision.
One of the questions I have is the announcement said they're going to have higher prices. It doesn't necessarily mean higher fares. Do you think airlines are going to go back to this? I mean, I've been reading about people saying that they're going to start charging for carry-on bags and other kinds of things. Do you think it might go into fees rather than fares?
I think it is. I mean, the last time prices went up, they put on a fuel surcharge on tickets. That may be a possibility. But overall, we saw a report from the International Air Transport Association that basically said that their profits are going to be down by 12% from the record that they set last year. That's a huge drop. That's billions of dollars. So I think because of the competitive nature of airlines, they're going to try to keep those ticket prices down. But eventually, if prices stay high, eventually they're going to pass those costs on.
Phil, in terms of what people are going to be paying at the pump this summer, are your estimates, have they come down recently with the drop in the cost of crude oil?
I think they have slightly. I mean, right now the national average is about $2.95. We do expect another run-up in price right before the 4th of July, which is typical. But right now we haven't hit that $3 a gallon area. But the big picture for gasoline prices, the era of low gasoline prices are over. Even if prices go down, they're going to stay pretty much where they are right now. There's a very strong global economy. Demand is strong. And the other thing I'm really concerned about is the cost of diesel. The truckers have really been feeling this price increase. You know, gasoline prices are at $2.95, but if you're a trucker, you're paying an average of $3.21 a gallon. That's mainly because the light oil in the U.S. doesn't produce a lot of diesel fuel, and those supplies are a lot tighter than gasoline.
Right, and those higher freight costs, if you will, broadly speaking, Phil, it filters through to other businesses. We've heard that from the food company Cisco, just as one example. So, again, the rising prices are filtering through the economy and will show up in ways we might not expect. Phil, great to see you.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dagen.
Phil Flynn in Chicago for us. Coming up, Bill Clinton's eyebrow-raising take on impeachment, why he says the only reason President Trump isn't facing impeachment hearings right now is because he's not a Democrat. And hooked on your smartphone, many of us are, but now Apple is set to reveal new software that is supposed to help you kick your screen addiction.
No worries, we're rocking all kinds of concoctions in our hands. Yeah, tomorrow can wait till tomorrow. It's all about tonight.
Good morning. I'm Dagen McDowell in for Maria Bartiromo. It's Monday, June 4th. Your top stories at 6:30 a.m. Eastern. Markets extending gains. Futures pointing to a triple-digit rally at the open. A 137-point gain on the Dow futures right now. This after stocks rallied on Friday following that better-than-expected jobs report. And it was a blockbuster. 219 points what the Dow gained on Friday. And global markets following America's lead, starting the new week in Europe. We have buying across the board, nearly a 1% gain on the FTSE 100 in England. In Asia overnight, same story. We have strong global markets with both the Nikkei in Japan and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong gaining more than 1%. Former President Bill Clinton weighing in on the impeachment debate surrounding President Trump.
I think if the roles were reversed, if there were a Democratic president and these facts were present, most people I know in Washington believe impeachment hearings would have begun already.
We take a closer look at those comments straight ahead. A celebrity surprise for the graduating class of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Jimmy Fallon giving an emotional and uplifting commencement address. This after the shooting there earlier this year. Another strike averted in Las Vegas. The culinary union reportedly making a deal with MGM. We will have those details. And Apple looking to address the growing issue of phone addiction. Details on the announcements we're expecting from the Worldwide Developers Conference. Plus, SpaceX launching a satellite overnight, but it's not all success. The company announcing a delay to its space tourism plans. But to our top story this half hour, President Bill Clinton ramping up his rhetoric. The former president arguing that impeachment hearings would have already started if a Democrat was the commander-in-chief during the current investigation on meddling by Russia into the election. Here's what President Clinton said during an interview on CBS yesterday.
I think they have tried, by and large, to cover this investigation based on the facts. I think if the roles were reversed, now this is me just talking about it based on my experience. If there were a Democratic president and these facts were present, most people I know in Washington believe impeachment hearings would have begun already.
Joining us is former Ohio State Senate Minority Leader and American University School of Public Affairs Executive in Residence, Capri Cafaro, along with former Massachusetts State Co-Chairman for Trump's presidential campaign and U.S. Senate candidate for Massachusetts, Jeff Geel. Jeff, back in 1999, the Senate voted to acquit President Clinton of both articles of impeachment. What is your take on this, that he raises this issue now?
Well, Dagen, thank you for having me on. And I will say it's hard to believe that President Clinton is making this comment after he was given such a pass, whether it was Whitewater or whether it was Travelgate, to the point where his wife ended up scrubbing a server and seemed to be getting a complete pass. So very ironic that he would be making these accusations.
Capri, I look at it from this point of view that Hillary Clinton has not really been out there campaigning in the midterm elections for the most part. She did endorse Governor Cuomo in New York recently. Right. And President Clinton has been largely absent, but he kind of comes out with this whopper. And I say that because the special counsel investigation is still ongoing. We don't have a report delivered. Right. And he says this, that impeachment proceedings would have already been started.
Look, I think that, you know, President Clinton is somebody, obviously, he's gone through this before personally. His wife lost. So I think that there's just a little bit of maybe a bad taste in his mouth, if you will, over this whole impeachment thing. I think that, you know, he's gone through this before, and I think that the only point, frankly, that I think President Clinton is making is that, you know, if it was a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, maybe it would already be done, and vice versa. Look, there's a lot of concern that if the Democrats take back the House, that they could start the impeachment process. So, unfortunately, what has happened with impeachment is that it's become a political hammer more than a legal proceeding, and that's a problem.
Well, given what his impeachment was, the impeachment proceedings on President Clinton, what they were related to, it was kind of curious that he wasn't pressed on his thoughts on the Me Too movement, even what Kirsten, you know, raised the issue again of where Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator, said about President Clinton that he should have resigned. And we've gotten some commentary from him on that recently. But I mean, your take on that, because again, if you're going to talk about impeachment, let's talk about all of it, Capri.
You know, I think we also need to put some context into this interview. Apparently, Bill Clinton just wrote some sort of a political thriller with John Patterson.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's doing these interviews as part of a book tour. But sure, I mean, I've always said you got to be equitable in these conversations, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you're going to have the conversation surrounding this, then sure, I mean, be fair and have a conversation about the reasons behind impeachment, which were not just Monica Lewinsky, but frankly about lying, you know, as part of a deposition. So, you know, again,
but it was related to the Lewinsky affair. I mean, the charges were directly related to that.
Right, of course, of course. I mean, again, I think that, you know, the Clintons, frankly, and I say this as a Democrat, and I loved Bill Clinton as a president. I was not really crazy about Hillary Clinton, but the Clintons are part of the past, and we need to move forward and redefine the Democratic Party and stop continuing to go back and relitigate things from the 1990s. We need to move forward.
I want to, President Clinton also weighed in on the mainstream media bias allegations when President Obama was in office. Listen to this.
They did treat him differently than other Democrats and Republicans because it was the political press. You know, I don't know. They liked him. And they liked having the first African-American president. And he was a good president, I think.
Well, I want to get your thoughts on this, Jeff, because, again, he's weighing in on some very serious topics. And he definitely seems upset about the way that he was treated toward the end of his presidency, whether it was the impeachment proceedings. In the big picture, how does this help Republicans and hurt Democrats going into November?
Well, I will say that Bill Clinton's absolutely right that President Obama was given a pass on many things as well. Fast and Furious, Benghazi, which was a combination of Hillary Clinton and President Obama's administration. The press seemed to just continually ignore and whitewash all that was going on there. Now, at the same time, Donald Trump can't seem to catch a break. The DOJ, the FBI, the IRS have been weaponized against conservatives for the last, I don't know how many years, and all of this pointing to, you know, collusion within the government, you know, trying to keep Republicans from having any success. So I think, again, Bill Clinton needs to probably moderate his conversation about, you know, unfairness and talk about the fact that I think even President Trump is being treated unfairly.
And Capri, I just did want to point out that President Clinton was asked about the Kirsten Gillibrand saying that he should resign, and his response was kind of, it was all over the place. You know, she's living in a different context and she did it for different reasons, so I just disagree with her, he said during that interview. We just didn't play the clip. But what were you going to say?
What is he going to say? I mean, what does someone say to that? I mean, Kirsten Gillibrand is obviously angling to run for president in 2020, and certainly she wanted to, you know, capture on that Me Too movement and take a stand. But what is President Clinton going to say? Yeah, I should have resigned. I mean, you know, he's in a tough spot. But I think that conversation that we're having here is, why is President Clinton maybe not having as honest of a dialogue as I think people are maybe hoping from him?
Right. Well, Philippe Reines called Kirsten Gillibrand a hypocrite. President Clinton could have done that and said, given the support that she got from the Clintons, maybe that's one word he could have used. Meantime, former Vice President Joe Biden isn't ruling out a 2020 presidential bid while he continues to campaign for other Democrats. Biden's team is said to be outlining what his campaign could look like and will likely decide by the end of the year if he will run. This is according to reporting by NBC News. Capri, your reaction to this?
You know, well, I said earlier, we need to move forward and we need to have some new blood into the Democratic Party. Our bench is actually pretty weak, and, you know, I come from the state of Ohio. A guy like Joe Biden really connects with, you know, my people in the Rust Belt, you know, coming from Scranton. He's a straight shooter. And while he is old, so is President Trump. I think that Joe Biden regrets not running in 2016. A lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda there. And I think that he has a better shot than some of the more progressive names that we're hearing, like Elizabeth Warren and the like. So it's not an ideal situation, but, you know, if Joe Biden does run, he would be certainly somebody that I would support because I think he could connect with those Trump crossover Democrats.
Well, Jeff, he's certainly somebody who can talk to people who don't live in on the East Coast in major cities and in basically Los Angeles and San Francisco. He does know how to talk to the every man and the every woman.
Yeah, no, Dagen, and I think it was interesting. My opponent, Elizabeth Warren, was in Ohio just a few weeks ago stumping for a Democrat governor's candidate because I think she's trying to grease the skids for a 2020 run, obviously. But showing that Joe Biden's out there thinking that he has a chance of running just, I think, is a good example of why Elizabeth Warren has no chance of becoming the nominee for 2020. She's done nothing for Massachusetts, no credits to take, nothing to take credit for, and now she's basically wants re-election so she can spend 2 more years doing nothing for Massachusetts. That's why I'm running this race, to make sure that people know they have a choice in November to have someone who's going to work for them down in Washington, D.C. versus someone who doesn't even have a chance to run in 2020.
Capri, it was good to see you as always, Capri Cafera.
Absolutely,
and
thank
Jeff
you.
Deal. Thanks for coming on. Coming up,
Thank you
breathing
so
a
much.
sigh of relief, workers striking a tentative deal with another Las Vegas casino days after threats of a massive walkout. Details on the plan ahead. And another successful launch for SpaceX's Falcon 9 early this morning, but a major setback for SpaceX's intergalactic tourism plans. More on the failure to launch coming up.
Your lovin' give me a thrill, but your lovin' don't pay my bills. Now give me money. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want.
A surprise speech for Stoneman Douglas High School graduates. Cheryl Casone has the details. Cheryl?
Yeah, Dagen. So the surprise commencement speaker was late night host Jimmy Fallon.
You won't be classmates anymore. You'll be adults who Facebook search each other at 2 in the morning for the next 10 years. When something feels hard, remember that it gets better. Choose to move forward. And don't let anything stop.
It was quite a moment there. Fallon continued, though, of course, to provide some comic relief and then, of course, share that heartfelt message of hope to the students there. The graduation coming months after the shooting in Parkland that left 17 people dead. 4 students killed would have graduated yesterday. Well, a crisis averted for MGM Resorts. It has reached a tentative labor agreement with an employee union. MGM joins Caesars Entertainment in approving new 5-year contracts with union workers, avoiding what could have been a major disruption in business as Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals is returning to Vegas this week. Of course, here are those employees celebrating in that video. Details of the agreement not disclosed, but casino workers have been asking for an increase in wages and benefits for the last several weeks. And then finally this, another successful launch overnight for SpaceX's Falcon 9. The rocket carrying a massive communication satellite that's going to bring data and broadband services to Asia, Australia, and the Middle East taken off. This is Falcon 9's 11th launch this year. Meanwhile, more news. Elon Musk's big plans for space tourism are being put on hold. SpaceX announcing that its mission to fly tourists around the moon will likely not happen until 2019 due to technical and production problems. Next year, okay. Musk previously said he'd hoped to launch the first test flights by the end of this year. So next year, going to the moon, Dagen. Or so he says. I don't know. Back to you.
Might want to worry about that car company.
Energy.
First.
Yeah, I love it's like, we're going to the moon, but this electric car, this inexpensive electric car.
Yeah, that Model 3.
Struggling with that one. Thank you, Cheryl.
You bet.
Coming up, kicking your smartphone addiction. With help from Apple, the tech giant expected to reveal big news today about the latest software update that could help you reduce your screen time.
Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I wanna really, really, really wanna say, if you wanna be my lover, you gotta get with no plans, make it last forever.
Attention iPhone addicts. Apple is reportedly unveiling new software to help consumers digitally detox. According to published reports, the feature is called Digital Health and will help users limit their screen time. This comes as the tech giant will hold its annual Worldwide Developers Conference in San Jose today and outline its software strategy for the next year. Joining me now is trends expert, futurist, CEO of Tech Savvy Global, and the author of Make Change Work for You, Scott Steinberg. Scott, Apple changed the smartphone industry. Now they're helping tools creating tools to help you break that iPhone habit. Why are they doing this now?
Well, as you might imagine, Apple has sold in billions of devices. People love these things. The question is, how the heck do we get them off them? Companies like Google on their Android devices have already introduced digital wellness tools, so it's only a natural fit, giving increasing calls and pressure for Apple to cut down on people's smartphone addiction, for them to put in timers, screen time limits, even apps that will prevent you from accessing your favorite applications during the day at work. So maybe you can break that Candy Crush saga addiction a little bit.
Scott, aren't we already moving away from this with the proliferation of these Internet of Things devices, as well as the virtual assistants that we're having, like the HomePods? Aren't people moving away from using their actual device and starting to use other devices or other things? And Apple's actually behind in that regard. I mean, their virtual assistant Siri has lost way to Alexa. I mean, is that where we're headed?
Well, we're definitely seeing people play with a variety of different devices. They're splitting their time between different screens, and even as you pointed out, on devices that don't have a screen. Siri and the HomePod, some of the smart speaker business, has fallen a bit behind where Google and Amazon are. In fact, at the Worldwide Developers Conference, you can probably hear Apple talk a little bit about what the future of Siri is going to hold. They need to make the service a little bit smarter. They need to talk about integrations with different devices, from speakers to headphones and even cars. And perhaps they'll even open up the platform, the Siri platform, so that other developers can create all sorts of fun applications and new uses for it. But they definitely are playing catch up on that front, and people are definitely using more devices across the board. So should be an exciting day in terms of news.
You know, it did seem that Apple was always ahead of the curve, that Apple was the model. Whenever I had a client, they said, I want to be more like Apple as far as innovation goes. It seems like they're falling behind with their launches. They're getting more bugs, and it seems, you know, in all of these things, do you think they're going to make a big announcement that's going to help create a vision for the future?
I think absolutely you're going to see Apple paint a picture of what's coming next, and I wouldn't count them out of the game at any time. As we've seen countless times in the past, they're prone to bouncing back. I think this year the focus is going to be more on software than hardware devices, though. Some of the big surprise reveals may surround the introduction of Apple TV as a video streaming service, more like Hulu and Netflix. And in fact, one of the buzzes that everybody's talking about is the fact that maybe pretty soon you'll be able to run iPhone and iPad apps right there seamlessly on Mac computers, seamlessly integrating computers and smartphones more going forward. So I think they'll have some pretty exciting announcements, and they'll probably touch on Siri and privacy issues as well and draw a hardline stance. Unlike companies like Google and Facebook, Apple's more in the business of selling hardware, not users' data to marketers. So I think you'll hear about that as well.
Let me raise an issue with you, Scott, because there's this big story that the New York Times reported, an investigative story that Facebook gave device makers deep access to data on users and friends, and one of those named is Apple. So Apple's been quite pious about not selling your information, protecting your own information if you're an Apple customer, but they seem, and this is a question, all too willing to take information on individuals if it's coming through another company. Tim Cook's gone after Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg has pushed back on that. So it raises an issue about a little bit of hypocrisy at Apple.
Well, who knows what the heck is going on behind closed doors, but keep in mind for Apple, it's not necessarily about selling that information on to marketers. They have services like Siri that are powered by artificial intelligence, and the more data you have on users, the smarter and better those services get. So I think Apple probably isn't as an extensive user of people's personal private data as many other companies may be, but of course, in some cases, it may be the pot calling the kettle black. There's a lot of jousting going on out there in the media, as you might imagine.
The Wall Street Journal also had a new story about a new level of security on your business trip, Scott. What do you make of that in terms of the invasion, maybe, of your employer in tracking your movements when you're traveling for work?
Well, there's some duty of care there. You have to keep in mind that any time a business sends you out on a trip, in many countries, they're taking a risk. They have a responsibility to exercise reasonable care in terms of knowing where you are and making sure you have updates and alerts, information on the areas in which you'll be traveling, and also provide emergency relief. And of course, we live in an increasingly unpredictable world, so people have bigger concerns as well. They're worried about terrorism. They're worried about crime. They're even worried about more natural disasters. So it's only a natural step forward that more companies would be tracking this information misinformation introducing these policies.
Scott, great to see you. Thank you so much. I hope any Apple TV thing is better than that Amazon one I've got, which basically blew up over the weekend. So thank you for that. Scott Steinberg, marking 500 days in office for President Trump. I talked to his budget director when we come back.